Hello, everyone, and welcome to our workshop on letters of recommendation and supplemental materials for your fellowship applications. But I think a lot of what we discussed today really will be for anything that you need letters of recommendation for. So job applications, those of you who might be in a master's program now and thinking of applying for a PhD program, you'll need letters of recommendation for that. So we'll be sort of thinking of it in the context of fellowships and awards because that's what our office is, but really it'll be widely applicable. Okay, so first I would like to welcome you all, and my name is Keith McCall. I am the Assistant Director of the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards. I'm joined by our Graduate Assistant, Honorine Rouillet, who is going to be helping lead the conversation today, and also by our Director, Dr. Adrian Stevenson, who is also joining us. And we have our special guest speaker today, our very happy to have faculty from the Department of Modern Languages and Linguistics join us. Dr. Leushuis is going to be answering your questions and guiding you through the process of getting strong letters of recommendation. So in your typical sort of fellowship application, you have sort of standard elements of the application. And two of the most important and the ones that are sometimes easy to not think about till the last minute are your letters of recommendation and your supplemental materials. And it can be pretty tempting to think of letters of recommendation as an element of your application that is really kind of out of your hands. You might think of it as something that your role is really just to ask somebody to write you that letter. If they agree, then all you do is sit back and wait until you start to panic at the last minute because you realize they haven't submitted their letter yet, and then you suddenly think you have to do something again. But that's not really quite accurate. There's actually a lot you can do to take an active approach in shaping the letters that go along with your applications. You can be making strategic choices in who you're asking to write recommendations. If you're early in your graduate career, you can be cultivating relationships with people you would like to have be your letter writers and thinking about how you can build a team of writers who can support your applications. And you can also help shape the content of your letters by guiding your recommenders through what it is you're applying for, what things they should emphasize about you for that specific opportunity. And so, in other words, you can actively direct the process of getting your letters, even if you won't be reading and directing their actual content. So today we're going to discuss how to get strong letters of recommendation to accompany your applications. And like I said, most of this will be applicable to basically anything that you need a letter for. So the format for today's workshop, we're going to begin with about a 30-minute discussion with Dr. Leushuis, and then we're going to have a Q&A session. At any point, though, if you have questions, please go ahead and drop them into the chat. You do not need to wait until the Q&A session to ask your questions. We might answer them in the chat as we go. We might incorporate your question into a follow-up question during the discussion, or we might hold it to the Q&A session, but you don't need to try to hold that question in your mind until we get to the Q&A. Go ahead and ask it whenever you would like. After we finish the discussion and the Q&A session, we will have a sort of brief presentation where I'll kind of sum up what we've talked about today and show you some resources that the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards has to help guide your recommendation process. So with that, I will stop my screen share and we will begin with the discussion.
Thank you, Keith. All right, so the first question, you've been both a letter writer and an applicant reviewer. Can you speak a bit about how you understand the role of letters of recommendation as an applicant component? Also, when reviewing application, what do you look for across the set of letters? In other words, how can students be strategic in getting letters that work together as a group?
Yeah, thank you, Honorine, and thank you, Keith and Adrian and everybody else for being here. It's a great opportunity, first of all. So I'm happy to contribute to that. So a couple of things I think for the letter is for recommendation letters to keep in mind is that reviewers will look for a concrete picture of their applicant. They will try to have both a wide picture. In other words, they will look for various aspects that they want to see addressed in letters of recommendation, but they will also, I think, want to have specific examples of performance. Oftentimes, we think of letter of recommendations as just having to say a lot of good things about somebody. But that may not always be the most helpful thing. Of course, it's a good thing to do that. But what reviewers for specific opportunities will often look for is what makes you stand out. And they have to regard applications, whether it's for a grant or for admission to graduate school or later for a job. They have to vet applications and applicants and see which one is really the best fitting for the opportunity that they offer or the job that they have for you. And so they need specifics often, specifics of, and a small example of being highlighted in a letter of recommendation. A small example of your performance is often more helpful than a paragraph full of praise, even though that's a good thing to have, but it doesn't always give them a lot of information. And so what we try to do as professors recommending students, and what you can keep in mind as you ask recommenders to do that, is to sort of, what can you think of as something you did in somebody's class, a performance aspect you did in somebody's class, that the professor could talk about, or the recommender could talk about, that may really profile you for this particular opportunity or for this particular job. So shall I go on? I have a few, I can highlight a few other things. I think also you want to do that same thinking across sort of the spectrum of people that you're going to ask. So depending on what kind of opportunity you apply for, it's likely that one of your recommenders will highlight more one aspect of your performance, another aspect. Let's say for a grant or for a job opportunity or for admission to grad school, you need to show yourself to be both a good potential researcher, but also a writer, but also a good potential teacher. And so oftentimes you're going to want to go to two different people for that. They will both probably say good things about you, but it's likely that you will want to work with somebody who can really emphasize that research or that scholarly interest or that writing or thinking aspect that you want to show of yourself, and another person who can really talk to your performance in front of a classroom. And if you didn't have that, your performance with others as a team. Perhaps you have done experiences or classes or internships where you really showed yourself to be a good team member, or how you worked in groups, and they can really effectively comment on that kind of aspect of your performance. And then it's totally fine if those two letters take two different directions, because they're still talking about the same person and they're actually completing the picture.
Thank you. That was very helpful, especially in, as you said, thinking of the letters as a team, as Keith mentioned earlier. Sometimes as students, we tend to see ourselves just as graduate students in the classroom, but we're more than that.
Mm-hmm.
We always advise at OGFA, we always advise students that there is an etiquette to asking for letters of rec. How do you prefer to be asked? Like how much ahead of a deadline do you expect to be asked?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm glad you bring that up. And I know it's on the mind of many of you, because it was on my mind when I was in your position. And believe it or not, professors still ask for letters of recommendation from peers that we sometimes need. So we still have to ourselves deal with these kind of questions. I think for etiquette, it's very important that time is of the essence, right? That you give it ample time. That I think is a real important consideration. And how to think about that. So you know that your recommender is going to be busy, right? Everybody's busy. So that's a given. But you also want to think of this in terms of, it's not necessarily the amount of time, because letters of recommendation, to write them, can take very different amounts of time. Some of them we can write in half an hour, right? It all depends on the opportunity or the format that is required of the letters. For other opportunities, we spend hours thinking of the right letter of recommendation, how to pitch it right, how to give it the right tone, etc. So it's really about allowing your recommender to schedule that time. That's the most important thing. So when I say a minimum of 2 weeks, that's a golden rule, I think. A good rule of thumb is to give recommenders at least 2 weeks. It's not, of course, we're spending 2 weeks on writing that letter. It's that we need to find within our schedules time, in particular for big grants that you may be applying for. But also if you want to apply for a PhD program, it takes quite a bit of time to write a good letter. And remember that recommenders want to do their best for you. So they really want to give it the time it needs. So it's about them scheduling that amount of time. So that's one thing, about 2 weeks. If you go over that and there's a golden opportunity and you know you were late, you better have very good reasons to be late. So you could still bring it up, but then just be honest in the communication. I would just say, for X, Y, and Z reasons, I didn't see this opportunity earlier. I really think I have a good shot at that. You can always ask us, you can always ask recommenders, but be prepared if they say, no, that's too short amount of time. They're not rejecting you. It just means that in that time frame, they want to do the best possible for you in most cases. And that means they cannot schedule that in anymore. So that's sort of how you have to think about the time frame. Another thing, what I personally like is clear information. So you want to be clear with your recommenders what it is you want them to recommend you for. So, and both in the sort of more abstract and the concrete. Abstract meaning, what kind of opportunity is this? What aspect of your profile and candidacy you want them to highlight? Those kind of things, what kind of skills, etc. But you also want to be very precise with information. When is this letter due? How do they want it? Are you going to get, nowadays everything is electronic, of course, but how is it going to work? Is the system going to send you an automated email, etc.? You want to be very precise in that. So for me, it helps if the recommender says, first, a little heads up message. The first contact is, Dr. Leushuis, there's this opportunity. It's due in 3 to 4 weeks. Would you be able to recommend me? And then a few words about what it is and if there's anything basic to know. Most recommendations are regular, so they're most of the time there's not, but it could be that there's a form versus a letter, or both a form and a letter, those kind of things. You throw that in there. Then I say, yeah, sure, I'll be happy to. Then you reply. What helps is then have everything in one email message, because people need to have a point of reference. That's easy. So you say, here's the information, this is the deadline, this is how you submit it, maybe through an automated message. Deadline is very important. Remember the timing. So for me and other recommenders, it's often, they need this by this time. So it's not that I'm going to want to do it the night before, don't worry, but I need to schedule it. And then information you want to put in attachments, like what am I going to need for me to write a strong letter of recommendation for you. Now, most of the time that is material you're going to be submitting. Whether or not that material is ready completely or not, that's not so important. In other words, if there is a statement you need to submit, or what else can we think of? A writing sample, for instance. You may still be fine-tuning that. Just attach it for me, because I will get the sense of what it is you're trying to do and how you present yourself to these people. Then I can chime in with that. If I'm a professor and I had you in class a while ago, remember that rule about I'm looking for specifics, right? That, oh yeah, he or she stood out at that moment. I may even remind the student and say, oh yeah, I remember you did an oral presentation on such and such a thing. Do you still have the text or a PowerPoint of that? Attach that. A paper you submitted. Often a paper is golden because it reminds me exactly of a final paper for a course. It reminds me of who you were, what you were trying to do, what we had discussed in that course, and all sorts of things are triggered in my memory that can help me write that letter. So that's sort of more in an attachment, but it's important I have it all in one place, because once I get to that, when I have to set my time aside, I have carved out my 2-3 hours I'm going to use to write this letter of recommendation. I don't want to spend half an hour looking for things or having to remind you to send me things. You see, that's more of the sort of the logistics and a little bit of a personal style too. Other recommenders may be different with that. I don't know. Does that answer the question a little bit?
Yes. And I think Keith had a follow-up question on that.
Yeah, so I just want to have this repeated so it's clear. So I think sometimes students feel like, oh, I'm going to send my recommender all this information and it's just going to create extra work for this person because now I'm asking them to read this statement and read this writing sample and go back and read this term paper I turned in this class. So just to say it again for the people in the back, you would prefer to have all that sent to you.
Oh, yeah.
Have an
Yeah.
information overload rather than not enough information.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We know, or we should know, how to handle an overload of information. In our positions, if we can't handle that, we shouldn't have been here. So we're not going to read every letter of your writing sample. That's not possible, but we don't need to. We know how to skin things in ways that trigger it exactly. And especially we want to be able to target specific places. And you may be adding something, oh yeah, I didn't really need that, but why not have it? There's absolutely no problem with that. So no, yeah, if that needs to be restated, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, of course you don't want to, you don't want to overdo it, but that's sort of common sense. You don't want to send papers to me that you did for another professor just to, I won't know your whole life, and that's totally fine. But in the case of what you did with me or what you think is important that I get a sense of in terms of applying and in terms of the opportunity that you're trying to profile yourself for, then more is better. Yeah.
Students sometimes find themselves in a panic, realizing it is less than 48 hours before deadline and one or more recommenders have not submitted their letter. In your experience, what is the best way for students to send reminders to recommenders?
The best way is to send them. So with that, I'm trying to say, just do not hesitate. I know there's a lot going through your mind and you feel maybe intimidated or you get into this panic. That may all be true, but at the end of the day, you are right to remind us. That is the bottom line to keep in mind, and not just right, that you need to remind us, but we also appreciate it. In most cases, I certainly myself, I think that is a total normal thing to do. You don't want to send me a reminder every hour to the 72 hours before the deadline. But again, common sense, but a very short, kind reminder. You can look up online ways to write a reminder. You get some language. Not that I need that, but some other recommenders, you may have to couch it a little bit, but you say just a friendly and kindly reminder, and you'll find a way. Just make it as innocent as possible. The gesture is enough. To have that little reminder, whatever form or shape it is, that is professional and just normal, kind, civilized, of course, then for me, that's definitely a good thing to have. And I know people who really need them and appreciate that you understand that they need them, because they may be working in a different way than I am, and they may be working closer to deadlines, and they actually expect people to remind you. So the best thing is to really try to put away your qualms and just say because also once you send the reminder, you will feel better about the whole thing. And it's out there, you remind them you did it kindly, that's what you had to do. And that's really important for us. That it also means it's an important thing for you, right? If we wouldn't get any reminder, we may be wondering, do you even care to apply for this? Why would I put in all that time? You see how it creates sort of a relationship of we both value each other in this process. And so absolutely, a short, kind reminder, timely, is absolutely an important part of this process. No hesitation.
And another awkward moments for students. Sometimes they apply for multiple fellowships and awards with similar deadline, and they feel awkward asking for multiple letters around the same time. So our advice at OHDFA is to remind students that faculty are there to support them and want to see them succeed, as you just said. But what
Yeah.
would you tell a student feeling embarrassed or awkward to ask for multiple letters in a semester?
Same thing. Don't be as easy to say that for me. Don't be embarrassed or don't feel awkward. I know I can't just say that, but it is absolutely true. So let me just say it as faculty recommending people. It's not just it is part of our job, but it's more than that. We really want that. If we decided to recommend you for something, and most of the time we do, because we want student success. So we want you to be successful. And so we already committed in this process. Don't worry, the rest is detail. So a reminder for a deadline, or, oh, I need this letter to be sent there and there as well. It's all details at the end of the day. I know they grow big in your mind because of anxieties and other things, but they're not big. It's all it is. It's just details. Details of you going through this process and us helping you and trying to be successful in that process. Also, I may add, nowadays, really people, even if they wanted to make a fuss about it, they have no excuse because it's all electronic, right? Oftentimes, all we need to do is a few clicks because the same letter can work for different opportunities. If the letter needs to be tweaked, that is fine too. It's not going to take us massive amounts of time because we don't need to completely redo that letter. It's still you, and it's still applying for something that fits within the range of possibilities that fit with you. So the letter is always sort of on spot anyways. Of course, there's few details we need to change, the date we need to change. Some cases we want it to really be addressed. Let's say you apply for 5 or 6 PhD programs, but there's one that you really feel, okay, I would love it if here the recommender mentions the committee by name or mentions a professor in that department by name. Sure, it takes less than a minute to do that. And we don't have to post them anymore like in the past. We just click. And so it's really important to realize we are really here to support you. It may look awkward, but it really isn't. And you do need to have your needs met. And we want you to help you in that. We realize you want to apply. We all did the same thing. So hopefully that helps people keep that in mind and navigate this.
Some applications offer students the option to keep letters confidential or to be able to view submitted letters. Generally, letters are confidential, but this can be a surprise to some students. Can you explain the importance of letters being confidential and why some students should or should not select the option to review letters?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I have a few things to say about that. May I ask what at your office you usually, what sort of do you have a default recommendation to the people you're working with?
The default is to ask to not read the letter.
Right? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Waive
Yeah.
their right to not view the
Yeah.
letter.
Yeah. I tell the students the same thing. I think it just makes it easier for everybody. But why? It's a good question. Now, first of all, agencies or universities or whatever you're applying for, I can imagine, I'm pretty sure there's legal reasons why they need to have that statement in there. It has to do with privacy laws in certain places. And I really don't know the ins and outs of that, but I can assume that in different states in the country, in Florida, we have a sunshine state. So certain information cannot even be kept private unless you specifically say so. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of that, but keep in mind that maybe in many cases, it's just a formality. They have to have that line in there and they need you to check that box. When it comes to sort of the relationship to your recommender and that question, I think generally recommenders, looking at myself, I think it's often, it just sort of makes it a little bit less, it's not that I'm looking for opportunities to say bad things, because I wouldn't have agreed to write the letter if there will really be an issue with you, with a student that I don't want to recommend for some reason. That needs to be cleared up before the entire process, if there were an issue, right? So it's not about that. I sort of feel that it's more, it gives a bit of sense of somebody's looking over your shoulder when you write this. And that's not because you want to say things that they may not want to hear, but it just gives a little bit more sense of freedom to say it the way you want to say it to these people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No,
I'm not sure.
It does make sense. We added that question because a student in a summer workshop was surprised that she couldn't read the letter of recommendation that her professor wrote, and she said, well, it's about me, I should be able to read it. And we tried to explain, as you did, that if the professor knows that you are reading their letter, they might not be as open about what they say, that if they're not reading the letter.
Because sometimes it's also, if there is an issue with performance, that's not at all a strike against you. And oftentimes the letter gives us the space to really elaborate that in the eyes of that agency, right? Let's say there's some kind of red flag on your application that really is only a red flag in the eye of the beholder. But let's say you or I are worried that the agency may, or whatever the committee, the reviewers may make a fuss about this. You always want to be proactive about it. So in the letter, again, in a desire to make a stronger case for you, you sort of want to acknowledge it and explain it, so we don't have to worry about that anymore, right? And we can just, it's a very strong case. In case you're wondering about this, this is what that is. Don't worry about it. That's what you want to tell them. But then, again, the person asking for this recommendation may think there's a problem, or may get worried, or may get, if they get to read that. So it's a delicate issue. Perhaps the bottom line is to think of it as, have confidence in your recommender. That's, I think, for me, the most important thing. If I decide to write your letter of recommendation, I totally support you, and I will support you, and that my letter is exactly what it will do. And I've had cases where I myself would show the recommendation to the person I was recommending, because, it was just good and I wanted them to be happy about it. But then it came out of me, right? I decided to do that. Whereas in this case, it's a little bit, I want you to write, but I want to check what you're writing. And I know it's not often that sort of mistrust, but yeah, that's sort of what I think about the issue.
So it sounds like, and I know because I've been in the shoes of a student asking you for a letter of recommendation, but
that's right. Yeah.
You do write, when you accept to write a letter of recommendation, you are planning on writing a strong letter of recommendation, which is not the case of every professor. Sometimes professors tend to say yes, and later, I mean, at the office, Dr. Stephenson and Dr. McCall, they read letters that are not always strong.
Right.
So are there any red flags that might indicate a letter writer is not going to produce the strongest letter? Sorry.
Yeah, also a very good, interesting question. And yeah, something it's, we're really going into deep waters, because these are the delicate issues of letter writer, of recommending in general, and true letter writing. Me personally, I think, so this has more to do with me as a professor, as a recommender, wanting to help you be successful at the things that fit best for you, where you can really show your potential. So this is not about good and bad in your performance. This is more about strengths, and make sure we invest in the strengths so that you really get the opportunities that fit with you, and where you can succeed, where you can really succeed. So And that all has to be talked through, I think, between recommender and student before. That's why you need to have a conversation. And in most cases, there's no need for a conversation. I already know this is a student I want to support. They picked the perfect opportunity that they want to apply for. I want to help them get that opportunity. So that's 9 out of 10 cases. But in some cases, you know a few things about that agency, and you feel that them applying for that may not be in their best interest, and that there's other things they may better apply for something else that will help them better reach their potential. So you may want to recommend them for one thing, but not the other thing, or at least you want to have that conversation with them. And in that conversation, it could be that things change, that they convince you, no, this is actually really something I want to do for X, Y, and Z reasons. Oftentimes, though, they realize, yeah, maybe I was talked into applying for this. Or what you often hear, it was very prestigious, so I feel I should apply for this. No, you need to apply for stuff that helps you reach your potential, prestigious or not, right? It's prestigious if it helps you reach your potential, is what I always say. So there's a little bit of that issue involved in to what extent letter writers will want to help you. But again, the conversation beforehand, also for the student asking for the recommendation, I think is good to have those. Then there's issues, of course, in particular with professors having you had in class, and I expanded on that a little bit in my written comments before. Some professors, they may want to help you, but they just simply don't know you very well, or you've just been to the class dynamic didn't allow that kind of interaction, right? And so again, there too, you want to be careful, or at least when you pick professors to recommend you for certain things, think about what classes did I have with them, and weigh the different options. You want to show, of course, that maybe that it was a class in the field that has to do with the opportunity you're applying for, so that you're well trained. But it may be you may get a better letter of recommendation from a professor that you took a little bit different class with, but you had a very rich interaction with during that time, because they can talk about your general performance and your personality and in dealing with academic issues. And that's often what professors will have in mind if they, I don't know, if some of them say no. And again, I hope that that's sort of cleared up beforehand. I've had to say to students, listen, I really don't think I'm going to be very helpful for you, because I just would, and you're better off working with so-and-so, right? That would help your case. You see, the interest is still, I want you to succeed. But I think another professor, another recommender will just do a better job at that for your sake. Again, I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And we have another situation that we would like you to briefly address. So this summer, a student faced a situation where their recommender has asked them to write their own letter, which the recommender will then sign and upload. There is certainly an ethical issue here, but there is also a very practical matter. Most people are not going to write as strong a letter about themselves. Do you have any advice for students who find themselves in this position? How should they navigate such a request from a recommender?
Move on to the next recommender. I would just not go in, open that can of worms. That's not the person you want to have a recommendation from. Well, and they're not, in fact, effectively not doing one. They're making you write it. It like you say, it poses all sorts. Of course, it's unethical, because, and it makes you complicit in their unethical decision, because it's not their words, but they're going to sign for it. But it's your words, and you had somebody else sign for it. You just want to stay away from all of it. That's my recommendation. Just say, okay, I'm sorry, this is not going to work. I will have, and again, it's rare, I hope, but you may know better than I do. I don't know. I hope it's very rare that this happens. It really should never happen. because this is, but again, move on, because then that avoids everything, right? It's you don't have to worry thinking about what should I write about myself.
But what if it's your director of thesis or somebody that is very important for your application?
Yeah. True. That is an important one. Well, I would probably try to convince them otherwise. And now, of course, the process of them, what we talked about before, in other words, provide materials to your recommender that help them write a letter. Perhaps there's a situation possible where you say, well, you sort of try to help them frame, this is the opportunity I want, this is how I would like you to help to frame my candidacy, right? But yeah, I hope that situation is just really rare, because in that case, I cannot think of any way that could be ethically correct for that recommender or for that student to do that, because you don't want to be, I would just try to, was that a sort of total hard no situation? They just wouldn't want to do it by any stretch of the imagination? Or was it more sort of a practical professors trying to save time or something?
I'm not sure in this particular situation. We know, I mean, we've heard this from more than one student over time that, especially in some of the STEM fields, that their advisors ask them to write their own letters, and then they will. But it sounds like what you're saying could be a very good suggestion in that situation is to push back a bit by saying, well, I'm not comfortable writing my own letter, but what if I provide you with detailed information and a set of notes that can guide your letter?
Exactly.
Could that be sort of a compromise situation?
A compromise situation that stays within the ethical, because you are then doing, it's just another form of doing what you already do, right? You're giving information to your recommender and helping them create this letter. That's normal. That's fine. That's how it should be.
Sure.
If that goes a little bit into, well, I think where I stand out, in my opinion, then really all the recommender has to do is to add to that language and make it their own voice. But that could be relatively practical, easy way to do, less time consuming. But I definitely do not, but you're right, that's a little bit pushback, try to compromise if you wish. Those are probably the best ways to think about that, and to sort of remind the recommender, in this case, the major professor or the research, the person, the research supervisor, that really they need them to do this, that this is in everybody's best interest, right? That and this is really where they need their help. So I would definitely push back on this and try to find a bit of a compromise situation. Yeah, it's a difficult case, definitely. Yes. Yeah, you hope nobody's in that situation.
I think we'll move to Q&A now, since we're getting a little later into the hour. But so we have a question from Chinonso asking, as a new international student, who do you think is best for him to ask to request a letter from, given that he doesn't yet have that many relationships with FSU professors, doesn't have a primary research supervisor? So I'll hand this one over to you in a second, but I just heard a great tip at a workshop for the NSF GRFP on Saturday, where if you are brand new to graduate school, a really good thing to do is to ask your current advisors or your current professors in the program who of your undergraduate advisors you should ask to write a letter, because they've read all the ones that accompanied your application, and they can tell you, they can sort of suggest who of that set of recommenders wrote you a really strong letter and could be a good recommender for you before you've built those relationships at FSU.
Yeah.
But Dr. Leushuis, yes, if you have further suggestions.
No, I would second that. And also it's also very okay to do that in your situation, Sean. So because it's understood that you haven't had the time yet, you haven't been around long enough in the new place to build those connections. So in those cases, it's also normal that people see an earlier recommender reappear from an earlier experience you did. That is fine. Later on, you really want to avoid that. You want to show that you moved on, that you created new networks and etc. Those kind of things. But that is a good suggestion. I would actually say that think of yourself also, which one of the recommenders I used before, I think was my strongest recommendation, even though you may not always get a sense. But then what Keisha says is helps you get that sense. Yeah, again, and perhaps there is a little bit leeway in the new people you met. Perhaps there's one person that you can already work with a little bit so that you balance it a little bit, because then you show both the old and the new, right? That you're moving on. You have these recommenders that recommended you before for very good reasons, and there's already some sort of recognition. You're getting picked up on by that. May not be a person who can write a long recommendation, who can address a lot of facts, but as long as it's a person you feel you already have a sort of a budding or starting relationship with, that you feel good chemistry about, then that could be an extra help. It also depends, of course, on the thing you're applying for, right? How much information do they need from these recommenders? But those two things. So work with previous recommenders and sort of think about who is it that you can add to that of the new group. That I think you have good chemistry. It's a bit of a gut feeling you need to have for those things. Yeah. Those are good questions.
Yeah, and start cultivating those relationships now. I mean, think about who you'd like to have be your letter writers and get to know those people, have them get to know you.
Absolutely. Right, right. Also very true, yes.
Okay, so much of this is just to sum up what we've just talked about. So, of course, the first thing is just to remember that letters of recommendation do play a very important role in your application. Kind of an increasingly important role now that so few applications are asking for things like your GPA or your test scores, because you didn't need test scores to get into your graduate program. So letters of recommendation are one of the few outside assessments that accompanies your application now, one of the few sort of data points that isn't something you're providing yourself to the reviewers. You might want to be thinking about having different a set of different recommenders for different things. So think about which recommenders will work best for the opportunity that you're applying for. Maybe you did a summer internship with somebody in a very specific context, and that person wouldn't be a great recommender for a lot of the stuff you're applying for, but that would be a really good recommender for one of the awards you're thinking for applying for. So just remember that you don't have to have the same set of recommenders for everything, that you might have sort of a pool of people who are your potential recommenders, and you can think of the 2 or 3 or 4 who work best for any given opportunity. And again, if you are earlier in your graduate career, be thinking about cultivating those relationships with potential recommenders now. Get to know people through your coursework, but also it doesn't just have to be in your coursework. If there's somebody that you're not taking a course with this semester, but you think that their research aligns closely with yours and you hope to get to know them in the course of your graduate career, go ahead and stop in during their office hours. Do what you can to get to know them. You don't have to wait until you're in their class to start that relationship. It's important to think about diversity among your letter writers. So different letter writers can discuss the different strengths, your different capabilities, your different experiences. They can address different points of view as an applicant. Having 3 recommenders who are all going to discuss you in the same context, in the same way, talking about all 3 are going to talk about your research experience, or all 3 are going to talk about you in a lab setting. That may not be as strong a slate of letters as having one person talk about you in a seminar setting, where they can talk a little bit about your interpersonal skills and your leadership in the classroom, and another person can talk about you in the lab and your responsibilities in a lab setting and working in an actual research collaboration. So think a little bit about having writers who can complement each other, and across the slate of those letters, they can really provide a holistic and rounded view of you as an applicant. And things we've already talked about here, but of course, remember to give your recommenders information about your fellowship. Tell them what it is you're applying for and what things are important for that particular opportunity. Every fellowship and award has a different focus, a different mission, a different goal it's trying to achieve. you fit with it in different ways than you do with other ones. So you want your recommenders to know what it is about you are putting forward about yourself for that opportunity, and the ways that they can speak to that aspect of you as well. So one way, of course, to do that is to give them the essays that you are writing for that application, your personal statement, any sort of research proposal or short answer essays that have to go along with that application. If your reviewers have those things, then their letters can better complement the rest of your application. And it is okay to give your recommenders some direction. Tell them why you're asking them to be a recommender, what it is you want them to be highlighting about you, to remind them about how they know you, when you got to know them, what it is you did in their classes. As Dr. Leushuis suggested, you should even go ahead and send them the term paper you wrote in that class. Show them, remind them what your work was and what it is you did to stand out in their class. Okay, let's briefly talk about supplemental materials, because that was the subtitle of today's workshop. So a lot of fellowship and grant applications require some sort of supplemental material. This could be something that attests just to it verifies your student enrollment status, or that you have reached PhD candidacy. That's a common one to need some sort of supplemental material to verify. These are usually pretty easy and small documents to get, but because of that, they can be really easy to lose sight of, and you can leave it till the last minute. Now, a lot of these also need to come from somebody in a uniquely authorized position to provide this type of supplemental material. Sometimes it needs to come from the registrar's office. If you do need something like just a enrollment verification, that might need to come from the registrar's office. If you need something that's attesting to that you have reached PhD candidacy, or that you will have by the time of the fellowship would begin, that probably would have to come from your department chair or even the dean of your college. And so this is another reason you should be thinking about these things ahead of time, because it might turn out you don't really know that person. You don't know the chair, or you do know the chair, but they're out of town. They're at a conference for a week. And so you have to ask the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences suddenly, who you've never met, never interacted with, and who is a busy person. So identify who that person is going to be early. You can also run into situations sometimes where you can't have the same person write you a letter as is also going to do your PhD candidacy verification. So for instance, if your primary advisor is also your department chair, then that means you can't ask your department chair to provide the supplemental material, because you're probably asking them to provide a letter of recommendation. So basically the point here is figure out what that thing is going to be early on, who you need to get it from, and go ahead and get it as early as you can in the process. You will find yourself very frustrated and upset if it's 24 hours to go before your application, and you just realize you completely forgot to get this thing, and you now have no idea who to get it from. The rest of your application is wonderful. You've gone through 10 revisions on your essays. They're in great shape, but the thing's incomplete because you're missing this one little form. So we do have some resources to help you through your recommendation process at AGFA. One of them is a recommenders worksheet. So those of you who are here today, I will send this to you in the follow-up. It's a fillable PDF. You can use it just to organize who you're asking to be recommenders for a specific opportunity. You just quickly sort of fill in the information, the name of that person, what their position is, why you're asking that person. Go ahead and give yourself the notes of why it is you're asking that particular recommender to write a letter. And then you can track your follow-up with that person. When did you initially ask them? What have they asked you to share with them? When do you plan to be back in touch with them? So just sort of any communication and follow-up you have with them, you can just keep those notes organized all in one place. We also, on the AGFA website, we have in our resources toolbox, we have a specific letter of recommendation toolbox that pulls together a set of different pro tips and resources to help you think about the letters of recommendation process. A lot of it will be redundant with what we covered today, but if you need quick reminders, quick sort of go-to resources, you can click this link right here on the PowerPoint, which you will also get sent. Also, this screenshot is a clickable link as well. In our fall 2020 newsletter, we also had a pro tip with Dr. Leushuis about letters of recommendation. So again, a bit redundant with what you've heard today, but if you want to go back and get a sort of quick reminder of things we covered today, please go read our fall 2020 newsletter. And again, the links are active in this PowerPoint. You can click that either here or click the screenshot of the newsletter, and that'll take you straight to it. We'll end the PowerPoint here and come back to see if there are any final questions.
Keith, let me just add one thing. I'm not sure who of you on the call are sorry, international students, but just keep in mind, especially with the paperwork you mentioned for transcript, additional supplement, often for international students, you want to take that little bit extra time. Nowadays, these things have taken a little bit more vetting and time. And I speak as myself as an international, or originally I came here as an international student. So so just something to add in terms of, it's a very good point that you keep in mind those ancillary materials to your application, and do them in a timely way.
Yeah, good. Thank you for saying that. So Chinonso had another question about what to do in a situation where his recommender would prefer to issue him a paper copy of the recommendation rather than upload it to the submission portal. I'm not sure if you have advice for that situation.
Yeah, I saw the question, also a good question. These things happen. I would probably try to reach out to the agency first of all and see if they can accept these things in some form or shape. Again, if there's some leeway possible, whereby it's sort of important to keep in mind that the agency will probably want to see this come from an independent source. In other words, perhaps there's somebody in the department, a staff member who can help you. If the recommender really doesn't want to do it electronically, and the agency accepts a paper copy, but then it gets mailed from the department by somebody neutral, independent, not by yourself. So that there's some kind of idea that, oh, I didn't see this recommendation. This is really comes authentically from my recommender and was put in the mail. So I will probably just look for little ways where there's leeway, or perhaps a person in the department, they allow it to be sent to them via email as a PDF attachment, in which case a staff member of the department may be willing to do that for you. So it's a completely neutral person who has no interest in your application, who has no no interest in the situation, but it's simply sort of a business solution to get this letter over to the agency. Those are two things I could think of here. If you need to work with an individual who really doesn't want to upload it electronically, or I guess is challenged in doing so with the difficulties of technology, which sometimes still happens. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things you said there is a very good point, which is that most things that you want to apply to are going to have some sort of program officer or point of contact who will be happy to help you navigate situations. Their job is to be there for you to reach out to and ask them those sort of technical, specific questions about your application and getting all the parts into them. So that person's usually easy to find the contact for. If you go to like the website for the fellowship that you're planning to apply to or something, you can find somebody listed as program officer, and always consider that person be a resource during your application process.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you again, Dr. Leushuis.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. I'm so glad that you guys doing these workshops. This is very useful, I can imagine, for so many students, and it's wonderful that they have this opportunity and this resource, and I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, I think it will. I think letters can really kind of seem like a black box of the application, because students don't see what the letters say, and they're not really. It's unclear exactly why they are confidential and sort of what their role is in the process. And so I think anything we can do to sort of demystify the role that letters play and how you can shape your own letters a bit is very useful.
Yeah, exactly. Demystifying, I think, is a word that's a good word, right? That there's thinking in this process that there's different ways of thinking about it that you can follow, and that will be helpful in doing this. I do recognize it's a challenging part of applications, but also think of it as it's necessary and it's a good thing it's there, and there's ways to make that work for you. So absolutely, yeah.
I just wanted to add, students will need to know the nuances and the etiquette around requesting letters even beyond the degree programs that they're in. So I think this information is really, really useful so that as they start to think about their careers beyond the degree and applying for jobs, and many of those jobs requesting letters of recommendation, now they have this thought process around who to ask, how to ask, when to ask. So this is really useful information that extends beyond fellowships and awards and is supportive of them really developing as scholars and preparing for early career.
Okay, well, thank you all for attending today. I hope to see you at our future workshops. We have one coming up in 2 weeks on communicating the significance of your research, and then we have another in early October on that is specifically for humanities and grant and fellowship writing in the humanities. So I hope to see you at those.
Thank you for attending. Good to see everybody.